Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded, produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. Go to bit.ly/support, capital G, capital T, and podcast. I repeat, bit.ly/supportgt podcast. Thank you so much. And for more information, please visit Natalie's website, join the podcast Instagram page, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates on future episodes. So I've known Trish for a couple of years. Right before the beginning, it was clear and obvious. Those two, Trish and Mr Benjamin, had a deep connection. Benjamin was part in everything Trish did and everywhere she went. He supported her in every way possible. They were inseparable. It comes to no surprise that Benjamin's death just 5 months ago left her in despair. Trish's heart was broken and her life was missing the most essential ingredient. Her most trusted friend and companion, her golden retriever, Benjamin. About this week's guest. Patricia A, Muehsam, MD, a pioneer in the synthesis of science, holistic health and contemporary spirituality, has been a thought leader in the alternative medicine movement. She forged new ground that led to the establishment of the Office of Alternative Medicine at the National Institutes of Health in the USA, endeavours that transformed the landscape of healthcare options today. Dr. Trish has distinguished herself as a practitioner, educator, research scientist, and award-winning author. She founded the American Medical College first initiative in alternative medicine, leading medical schools throughout the United States and the world to add courses in the field. Her original bioelectromagnetic research investigated distant healer phenomena and homeopathy. Her award-winning book, Beyond Medicine, a physician's revolutionary prescription for achieving absolute health and finding inner peace, has been hailed as the only health and healing book you may ever need. She offers health consultations, mind-body healing sessions, online courses, and communities of support. So Trish, thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you, Natalie, for having me. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Before we jumped on our interview Zoom, I was feeling very, very peaceful and grounded. And your little introduction, the personal introduction, brought up some feelings about Benjamin. But that's okay.
So maybe tell the listener who don't know more about you. I mean, we've been friends for a while now. But tell us a little bit about your life and how grief and trauma has been part of that.
Well, grief and trauma have been part of my life for long standing, ever since my childhood. But I haven't really had the experience of healing through all of that fully, I would say, actually, until Benjamin's passing. I had some experiences earlier on in my childhood and then in my early 20s that were very traumatic, that I didn't fully process. And along with the wave of emotions that came up when I allowed myself to process or feel the feelings I was feeling around the loss of my dog, came up many, many memories and many emotions and many energy vibrations in my body from the past. So and my work, just another little PS there, is my work is as a holistic physician, and people usually come to me with physical health issues, sometimes issues of the psyche, but a big theme of my work is that the mind and the body are intimately and ineffably linked. And yet it was still for me to truly walk my talk and practice what I preach, and the loss of Benjamin, or let's say his transition, because I do believe that we don't simply begin when we're born and end when we die, but he transited to a different form, gave me more of an opportunity to really walk my walk and practice what I preach in my work, which is the notion that all healing is emotional healing and all physical issues are linked to emotion. So this was a huge, ripe time for me the past month since his leaving his body, so to speak.
Maybe give a little bit more of an insight to people listening as to the different kinds of losses or trauma. And as I agree with you, the word loss insinuates that we've lost someone or something to whatever or however, in what way. But I also don't believe that we lose the people. We just transition into a different relationship. I mean, yeah, so to be clear with that, but for people to get an idea of the kind of experiences that you relate in terms of your history.
Yeah, and the losses that came up for me that Benjamin's passing brought to the surface weren't losses of loved ones. They weren't deaths or transitions, or but they were losses and traumas that I experienced. And the first one was my father's stroke when I was 13 years old. My father had a catastrophic stroke that left him what we call hemiparetic and aphasic. He was paralyzed on one side, and he was not able to get the words out that he wanted to say. So he lived for almost 20 more years. But the stroke was a loss of my father in a sense, because his personality changed, his role in our family changed. So that was a huge loss. And some years later, when I was in my early 20s, I wouldn't necessarily call it a loss. It was more of a hugely transformative experience that was traumatic for me. I started having out-of-body or psychic experiences. And these were kind of sensitivities that I had as a child, but I didn't fully grasp them when I was a child to really understand what was going on. Maybe seeing something that would happen in the future or having a sixth sense about a person. But when I was in my early 20s, I started having a really prolonged period of several months of intense psychic awareness. I could know people's thoughts without their speaking. I had an ability to see the future in dreams, in sleeping dreams, and in waking dreams. I had some other abilities with my hands. Like I remember being able to bend keys. It maybe sounds woo-woo and crazy to some listeners, but this is the field of parapsychology, which there is a huge and robust area of research supporting its veracity. In other words, the mind has tremendous capacity over matter and really can transcend how we experience the flow of time and how we experience our world around us. So long story short, it was an incredible period of enlightening, empowering, inspiring, really transformative sense of being. I had an incredible feeling all the time of well-being, no matter what was going on. But I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand at all what was going on. And I told the wrong people, and I ended up getting committed to a locked psychiatric ward and diagnosed as probably schizophrenic, maybe manic depressive, and placed on multiple medications to basically, quell those experiences that I was having mentally. And so that, I call it an incarceration. That was very traumatic for me. I had to leave school. I was in college at the time, and
so how old were you? How old were you at the time?
I think I was 21.
Okay.
Yeah, I took some years off before I went to college, so I wasn't the usual age of college. I was a seeker who wanted to kind of do things differently, not the way everybody did things. I wanted to do them a little differently. So that was very traumatic. There was a lot of shame in my family around it all. Why is Trisha not in school? And also, I was being very heavily medicated on these 4 drugs that made me feel really numb mentally and emotionally. And I could look at the newspaper and see the words of the title of an article, but I didn't know what they meant. And also quite almost literally anesthetized in my body in terms of moving. Like I had to think about how to move, how to walk, and I was confused about dressing. I just had a lot of cognitive thinking and emotional and physical effects of these medications. I definitely did not feel like I was in my own skin. I didn't have an affect. I didn't have feelings. If you saw pictures of me, I looked just kind of numb, just kind of lifeless. So this is a longer story that I want to kind of come back to the center and come back to our focus.
Sure.
Long story short is I had a mother who was remarkably ahead of her time, who said to me, "We need to get you off these medications." After I've been spending, this was over a year and a half later, just spending days on end in a bedroom, sleeping and eating. And I'd gained a lot of weight. I'd gained like 40 pounds, and I was always kind of not comfortable unless I was in a body that felt fit. And she came up to my bedroom one day and said, "I need to wean you off of all these medications." And slowly, little by little, she cut the capsules. She cut tablets in half and half and half, and she emptied out parts of capsules. And slowly, little by little, I came back to the person that I was, to feeling my thoughts, to feeling my feelings, to having feelings, and to feeling in my body again. Like I knew how to walk, and I knew what clothes to put on first. So it was a traumatic and a transformative experience. And I don't ruminate. I don't kind of go back to experiences in my life and harbor on them or harp on them. But the experience of being present with the feelings that came up around Benjamin's loss brought me back to the past. It brought me back to my father's stroke that I had a lot of grief around. There was a me that was before my father's stroke and a me that was after my father's stroke. And my brother always says to me, "Trisha, you always think of our childhood as happy before daddy's stroke, and you never think of our childhood as happy after his stroke." And that something happened to me when he had a stroke.
Yeah.
And I became a very anxious person. I became a person that did not feel safe or secure in the world. And that's something that I still experience in my psyche a lot from time to time. I've learned how to move through that. It's helped to be a physician practitioner who feels strongly about the mind-body link. And I've learned many, many tools to help me process through that. But the experience coming back to Benjamin brought me back to the past, and has actually brought me to some new healing explorations of who I was before this non-physical loss of my father, but a loss of my father in a sense, and who I became after that, and healing through that, and also the trauma of that hospitalization and a lot of the emotions that were suppressed. And I do believe it's part of my worldview that, what we resist persists, that common phrase. And when we hold emotions in the body, they stay in the body, they stay stuck in the body, and they can keep us from healing. They can be causal factors for physical disease. So all of that has brought me back to some healing processes around those experiences.
I shared with you before we started recording this that David has this beautiful way of explaining loss, but also non-death related losses. And when you were speaking about the loss of your father, or the loss of the relationship you had with your father, it reminded me of David's words saying, this kind of trauma that you described is the loss of the relationship the way it was until that point. And that's very significant, because this is what, in your words, that what brought you that kind of safety and security, where the nervous system was at ease. And this change of his persona, of the way he acted or what he was capable of, makes it very difficult to feel safe and secure, especially as a growing up teenager who is used to someone, and to then have someone else who's acting differently or cannot do or say or do the same thing as before is very disconcerting.
Yes, and something also that I'll add is that my father was a doctor. He was a cardiologist. He was also a Holocaust survivor, and he had much unhealed trauma. He was a survivor and a thriver. He was from Berlin. He suffered a lot because of the events of Hitler's rule, and he never healed that trauma. He survived and he thrived and he went on. And it was interesting because after the stroke, he became much more emotionally expressive. He never talked about his feelings before the stroke. But we've also heard, and I'm sure many of your listeners have heard of, the notion of inherited trauma, ancestral trauma. So, it may very well be that much of my anxiety is also linked to the fact that I inherited this trauma from my family. My mother grew up in Britain during World War II. The German fighter jets rather, used to use their unspent artillery and shoot at she and her siblings when they were playing outside. They lived in the fields near the coast of Dorset. So she had a lot of trauma from World War II. So I inherited this trauma that neither of my parents really processed. They were both survivors and thrivers and very functional people in the world. And how is that relevant? I don't think we need to go back and heal that per se, but it makes me more aware of where those feelings can come from. And it makes me realize that it didn't necessarily start with me, which is a common term that we use. And but it comes back to the notion of just being moving through the experience of self-awareness of the feelings and using different tools to be present with the feelings, which again, Benjamin's loss brought me back to these events in my life, as well as smaller events that had to do with similar emotions of loss and shame and feeling unsafe and not okay in the world.
Yeah.
Feeling like not like I wanted to kill myself, but feeling like I didn't want to be here.
Yeah.
Just feeling not safe.
And you mentioned also in the beginning that given your training and the way you work with people, the courses that you teach, you would maybe, or I mean, I at least did in terms of my losses, having been a practitioner or a grief and loss specialist before, you would expect that, okay, I know this, I know how to do this. But then when we go through our own experiences, it is like the dentist who still has toothache, even though he knows exactly what to do about it and can't even do it himself. He needs someone else to do it on his mouth. So how did you, in the last 5 months, how did you be with Benjamin's passing? How did you deal with the way you were affected by that?
Well, in the beginning, I didn't allow myself my feelings. I just carried on. I remember the day that I had Benjamin euthanized at home. I had a session with a patient in the evening. I had a video session. And it went very well, according to the person's feedback. But, the next days after that, I didn't remember a moment of it. I just kind of pushed through. I survived and thrived like I learned growing up.
Yeah. You had two good models.
Yeah. And I did that for several weeks, maybe more. I didn't keep track. I just kind of kept going. I kept going, working with people that I work with one-on-one and teaching classes online. And I also was moving a lot. I'm somebody who likes to move in my body. I like to walk. I like to do yoga. I like to swim. I like to be very physical in my body. And I find it very grounding for me. I found it very grounding to be connected to my body. So I was moving a lot. I was walking a lot. In fact, I was walking a lot. And I was also dealing with a lot of, I don't want to call it guilt, but regret or reflection, because Benjamin, who was definitely the being I was most intimate with for the past years of his life. Even my students and my patients knew him because he would be in sessions with us, with them. He was very well until last July when I fell walking him and broke my arm. He actually pulled me. I wasn't being present. I wasn't being mindful, which is very important to be when you're walking a big dog on the streets of New York. And he pulled me because he was lurching towards another dog. He was a very social dog with people and dogs alike. He definitely, he definitely brought people into my life that I never would have had into my life otherwise. A whole community of people through dogs. If you people who are listening are New Yorkers, you know you're a dog person and you meet lots of dog people. But anyhow, he pulled me to the ground and I broke my arm.
Yeah.
And that was really the beginning of the end of Benjamin, because I broke my arm. I dislocated my elbow. I had to have surgery, and I did not navigate that disability very well. I was disabled without a functional right arm for about 4 months, and I really couldn't do a lot in the very beginning. It wasn't the first time I'd broken a bone with my dog, but it was a worser experience. I'd broken a wrist another time with him, and I was really stressed out, and I didn't handle that stress well. I didn't handle the emotions well. And he picked up my stress. For those of you who are listening, you know, animals are sensitive empaths, and they are they absorb our emotions. And he picked up my stress, and his health started to decline. And he became, it's a long story. I won't go into the details of his health, but a long story short is that he became lame in his hind legs. And at 16 years old, it's just wasn't likely that he was going to be able to get his strength back. And he couldn't do all the fun things that dogs like to do. So we decided to have the euthanasia at home. And I'm sorry, I'm just losing track of where I was. So maybe you can help bring me back.
So basically, you started saying about the guilt and the shame that,
right.
And you linked your arm with how Benjamin took that and what happened afterwards.
Yes. And maybe this is useful for some people to hear because how we may feel responsible for the loss of our loved ones. Yeah, I reflect often, and I still do, that if I'd never broken my arm, Benjamin would still be here. But yet, I also believe very, very strongly that there is a reality greater than my five senses and my thinking brains, and things do happen for a reason. And if Benjamin were still here, I would be fussing and worrying over him and experiencing a level of anxiety that I no longer have, because I don't have an older dog who I'm having to, consider whose mortality I need to consider. But yeah, so I went through a lot of feelings of regret and what if, just what if that didn't happen, he'd still be here. And I went through a lot of that. I went through that mostly in the beginning. Now I still reflect on that, but I'm at peace with it. I don't blame myself. I don't regret it. I miss his presence hugely, beyond words, beyond that I can explain in language. Mm-hmm. But I'm also in a new place in my life. I'm in a place in my life where I feel liberated because of the healing that I've allowed myself to go through, because of the grieving that I allowed myself to go through after the beginning resistance and sort of surviving and thriving and carrying on. I just kind of succumbed to my grief. And sometimes it was grief that caused me to wail myself to sleep at night, literally wailing, literally. I live in a building with really thick walls. I hope nobody could hear me. I live on the top floor, so there's nobody above me. I would wail myself to sleep. Just huge, huge outpourings of grief that in my memories brought up old griefs, some of the griefs I mentioned, and then old other feelings, old other feelings from the past of where I'd felt unsafe or shame or not secure or left out or not good enough. Just a lot of old feelings arose. And I just allowed those to move through me. I also, for some time, just didn't feel like doing anything. I just had no motivation to do my work. And I'm somebody who loves my work. I'm very, my work is my medicine. I'm married to my work.
Intrinsically
I was married
motivated.
to Benjamin, but I love my work. I love what I do. I'm very driven. I'm very passionate about it. And I had no desire to do anything. I had a feeling of commitment, and I get very close with the people with whom I work when I work one-on-one. And I didn't lose my feeling of commitment to people, but I just didn't feel like doing anything. I was still working, I was still engaging with people, but I just was kind of flatlined emotionally in terms of lacking that passion I've had for my work.
How did you come back to it? Because when we started speaking just today, before we recorded, and we checked in on each other, you said, I'm actually doing really well. How did you get that? How did you come back to it?
Yeah, well, a number of, I could say a number of resources and tools and experiences. I think, first of all, I had to feel the feelings. I had to feel the feelings to move through the feelings. So I had to allow these huge waves of grief. And I actually had to allow this, and this was hard for me, allow this feeling of not wanting to do anything, because that's uncomfortable for me. I feel alive and vital when I'm engaged in what I do in the world. So that was very uncomfortable for me. But I just allowed that. I also did a number of other things. I live, for those people who know New York City, I live across the street from Central Park. I always spend a lot of time in Central Park. It's my veritable backyard. It's really an urban oasis. I spent a lot of time in nature. It was hard for me in the beginning to go to the park because that's where I spent all my time with my dog. But I eventually was able to get over that and spend time in nature and just grounding my energy, sitting on a tree trunk or there's a lot of stones and huge boulders. So being in nature. I also started working with a woman who's a really gifted craniosacral therapy, somato-emotional release therapist. She's a friend and colleague of mine, and she just does very, very subtle body work that helped to ground me. If I say it helped to do anything that helped to ground me, and then through grounding experiences, I was able to be present and move through feelings. I also I continued to be involved in I have a committed daily yoga practice. It's not like a routine or a should. It's just something that I consider an essential aspect of my daily lifestyle. I see lifestyle as medicine, and I have a yoga practice where I allow myself to be present in my body, and I start my day with that and I end my day with that. I also have a daily meditation practice, which I will say is another medicine that if I did not meditate, I could not manage navigating my day. It helps me to bear witness to my experiences rather than to be run by them. It helps me to bear witness to my emotions rather than to be run by them. That doesn't contradict the idea of being present with emotions, which I allow myself to do other times. And as I said, I allowed myself to work to be present. I don't want to use the word work, just to feel the feelings, just to feel the feelings. Sometimes I would do somatic exercises. I would feel the feelings in my body and let them be in my body and not try to get rid of them, just be with them, never trying to get rid of them. And it was by allowing all of that, by grounding, by allowing the feelings, by not fighting the not wanting to do anything, but just allowing this emotional flat line, that it eventually started to shift. I also am somebody who's deeply in love with music, both as a listener and a performer. And I started singing again after Benjamin left, and singing with a group that I'd sung in before. And that was very healing for me as well. Just making music that, your whole body feels, and being part of a community as well of people making music, which is very uplifting. Yeah.
It reminds me of a story that I love. It's about Milton Erickson, who described watching people sing in a church. And he looked inside the window and he could see them sing together and breathe together. And he could describe the effect it had on them. And so when you were talking about singing in community, I mean, from a polyvagal perspective, we know that the nervous system reacts to co-regulation, to breathing together. And this is part of what you're doing in singing, right?
Yeah.
How was a reaction, or what were the reactions from your surroundings to Benjamin's leaving?
You mean other people in my life?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, much compassion and care and support. I live in an apartment building in New York. And I live in a neighborhood with lots of doormen, and Benjamin knew all the doormen at the various buildings. As I mentioned, he was a very social being with both humans and dogs alike. And the doorman would come out of the building to say, hello, I'm so sorry. We miss Benjamin. How are you doing? And he had fans at the shops around the corner, and he had, other fans in the park. So people were very, very caring and compassionate and understanding. And I have a lot of dog people in my life, so they get it. They get it. I think you have to be a dog person to understand that the loss of a pet can be a profound loss. Yeah. And as I said, I think I said this, I had a kind of intimacy with my dog that I'd never had with another human being. So it was a loss of that intimacy. Or let's just say it was the loss of the physical presence of that intimacy, because I do believe that he still exists. He's just a different radio station on the dial, so to speak.
Yeah. You mentioned that before we started recording, about the kind of relationship that you had with him. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to understand, for people listening, whether they're dog people or pet people anywhere or not, to understand that the loss is dependent on the relationship that you have with that person, that being, that even that thing. And so it is the question of what is the relationship like, and that is a big determining factor on what the loss means, or what the loss does to the person. It's based on the relationship. That's why parents who lose a child, they don't have the same kind of loss experience, because the relationship that they each had with that child is different. Just even by being mom and dad, or whether that's two female or two male, it's different. So if you were to describe your relationship, you said a couple of things already about you and Benjamin, but to give an understanding, to broaden the understanding of the relationship that you have, or might make also an understanding of how people feel about their losses, because I guess one of the things that I hear often from people is that the pet loss is minimized. Pet loss is often also compared to, like any other losses will also be compared, but they sort of put in a ranking. And so we want to give, with this podcast, also a way for not just pet owners, but also other people to get an understanding of what it actually does to the human psyche to go through a passing of a pet, or a loved person, loved being, loved thing in your vicinity.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. That was really lovely what you just said. I think pet loss can be minimized. and compared to the loss of a human being. And sometimes I feel, who am I to be grieving my dog when, my friend lost her partner of 30 years recently. But I think it's so true. It depends on the nature of the relationship, and that's really the loss that one is experiencing. And this is a sentient being. My relationship with Benjamin was quite remarkable and quite varied. I adopted him when he was almost when he was almost 4 years old, and he'd been left in a garage by his prior owners. So he had a lot of anxiety and fear of separation from me when I first adopted him. So we had a lot in common going on because I had a lot of that anxiety myself. So we kind of bonded over this this shared anxiety. And he was also very headstrong and very stubborn and very dominant and could be very aggressive and could be very, I wouldn't say angry, but aggressive. He was not neutered, which some listeners may not approve of. He was an intact male, and he could be aggressive. And for those of you who know the dog situation, often neutered male dogs are threatened by the intact dogs. So we had to be careful being in the city of many, many dogs, because he could inspire wrath in other dogs, or he can be aggressive himself. But he was also very charming. He was exceedingly charming. He loved attention. He would go to the various shopkeepers and get lots of attention, and I mean, everybody in the neighborhood knew this dog. I would go into the Apple store. We lived literally around the corner from the Apple store, the computer, phone, iPad, Apple store. Everybody in the Apple store knew Benjamin. Nobody knew my name. They all knew Benjamin's name. Benjamin is on TikTok at the Apple store. He's on Instagram at the Apple store. He read my book. He was in my classes. He would start to bark at me when I was at my desk for too long. And I always tell people it's good to take a break from screens every 20 minutes and rest your eyes and rest your brain. And, he was,
He was telling you, walk your talk.
He was saying, walk your talk. And he was really good for me in that respect, because he got me out of the house and into nature. He brought people into my life that never would have come into my life. He created a community for me. I'm somebody who's tended to be quite insular, as I said, quite driven in my work. I have some good close friends, but he created a community for me. And he was, a very strong, dominant personality with this undercurrent of anxiety underneath. So I think we had a sensitivity for each other and towards each other. And because of that, whether it was healthy or not, we were literally quite inseparable, especially since the pandemic, when I started working entirely remotely from home and doing video sessions for my consultations and classes. And I would take him everywhere. I would take him to the grocery store. I would take him shopping. I would take him, and he loved the car. I would take him everywhere. Yeah.
Thank you for painting a picture of Benjamin when I've seen him, at least through the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sure many people who know you personally or have met Benjamin, they can attest to the way you described him to me. So if you were to want to round this up and tell people who might have lost a pet and are dealing with the feelings around that, or even comments of people of, so are you going to get a new dog, or maybe comparing it to other losses they had in their life, what would you want them to know?
Well, I think one essential ingredient to moving through the experience of loss is just to allow the feelings, no matter how difficult or painful they feel. And for me, this was about allowing a type of pain I'd never truly allowed myself before. So it was big, was really big. And not to be afraid of that, to just try to trust that it's through the process of allowing them that you move, I don't want to say move beyond the grief, but you have an experience of healing by allowing them. A lot of people ask me, are you going to get another dog? And in fact, Benjamin is a father to 6 golden retrievers and is now a grandfather to multiple puppies. And his daughter just had a litter about 3 weeks ago. And no, I'm not getting another dog, at least right now. And I know people who have gotten dogs right away. I know people that have waited a long time. It's an absolutely personal choice. But for me, the healing that has happened and still happening for me as I've been moving through this experience of not having him in my life has opened up my life in many, many ways. And it's created a freedom, not just a freedom because I don't have a dog to walk 4 or 5 or 6 times a day. I do miss that. I have to kind of make myself get out and go for walks in the park. But the healing, the feeling, the moving through the feelings, the exploring the energies, the vibrations of feelings from past memories of loss and past memories of trauma and past memories of fear and past memories of horrid experiences, the allowing that has just created an opening in me, a freedom in me. And that's been really wonderful. And it's moved me to a place of peace and a place of ease. And the idea of getting a dog feels to me restricting, not because it involves practical aspects of having a 4-legged friend, but because I'm still needing to journey through this own healing for myself and continuing to open myself up, which is really what's happening. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Trish, for allowing us to take a deeper look into this loss that is also just 5 months ago, which I think is beautiful in the sense of having an ability to see where you've come from, how you traveled so far, and maybe to look at it at a later stage again. So I end with all of my clients or guests on the podcast with a rapid fire questions, which you might have heard listening. Would that be okay for you?
Absolutely.
So grieving and trauma means?
Healing.
And healing means?
Being present with feelings.
And what have you learned about yourself in the light of loss and trauma?
I've learned and continue to learn that there's just a lot that's still held internally from experience I've had in the past that were painful, that were traumatic, losses or traumas. And that's okay. And by just being present with the feelings that arise and the memories and doing something very, very somatic, it is a path to helping me.
And so this question is sort of a boiled down version of what we spoke about just before, which is, what would be one thing that you wish people knew about your specific kind of loss and trauma?
That it's important and necessary and essential to allow the feelings and to not be afraid of the feelings, no matter how difficult they feel. And to allow the process, to allow the process.
And what would be one specific thing that has changed since your loss and trauma that you wouldn't want to miss? I mean, you've mentioned a few, but
yeah, what I just mentioned, just the sense of freedom and openness that I have. That's not about not having a dog to care for, but I think it's the result of healing through a lot of old stuff, not just Benjamin's loss, but old stuff. And I'm continuing that. I'm not, I consider life a journey of experiences and healing. So it's just opened me up to more of that.
Thank you so much, Trish. It's been a pleasure to have you as a guest. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, for having me.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.